Good morning.
There's something.
Welcome to worship this morning. My name's Adam Hildebrand. I get to be one of the pastors here at LVfirst. Such a joy to be with all of you on this crisp morning. Glad you guys all made it here. Glad we were a part of it. And so whether you're joining us here in person or joining us online, we're excited to have time to worship together. If you're new with us this morning, I just want to extend a special welcome to you. So glad you're here. So glad you're a part of our worship experience today. We're better because of your presence here with us. And we'd love to get to know you. We'd love to hear a little bit of your story and just have a chance to share a little bit of our story, who we are, and what we're up to here at LVfirst. The last couple of weeks, we've been talking about this idea of the table. And the table is a place where when we sit down together, when we share time together, when we share a meal together, it helps to define and refine who we are as people. It helps for us to see what our family values are, what we should be experiencing, how we can engage with one another, how we can build community, how we can build one another up. And so today, as we continue that idea, I found this research from the University of Oxford that reveals that the more often people eat with others, the more likely they are to feel happy and satisfied with their lives. And the results of this study suggest that communal eating increases social bonding and feelings of well-being. And it even enhances one's sense of contentment and embedded within their own community. It helps people to understand who they are in the world. And that matters. Now, I don't know how your Thanksgiving tradition has looked or looks, but when I was growing up, we would all go over to my uncle's house, and there would be a lot of us, and we were the younger set of cousins in the family. And so we always ended up at this magical place called the kids' table, right? The kids' table. So at my uncle's house, he kind of had this long dining room and a kind of a formal living room, but the formal living room became more of a dining room. And so there was the big table where the adults would all sit. And then there was like this rickety card table, and that's where the kids would sit. And we'd be off in our own little world, on the nice table. There was all the nice china that you only get out once a year, and the silver forks and everything. And on the kids' table was the nice chinette that you can just throw away, and the plastic silverware. And there was always a nice tablecloth, a nice themed tablecloth on the adult table, and there was a nice plastic tablecloth underneath the kids' table, right? You know what I'm talking about? And the adult table felt like a million miles away. It just felt so far from the kids' table. We're over here talking about Smurfs, and they're talking about, world issues. The difference, the gap there just felt huge. And at the kids' table, you felt so unseen until you went to go get up with your plate, and then all of a sudden an adult was like, no, let me get that for you. Because they had all the food. Right? They had all the food at the adult table. There was no food on the kids' table, lest we spill anything or make anything any messier than it had to be. And over time, it feels like there's just this gap that grows. Like there's these walls that you can't overcome as you look down the way at the adult table. And I remember kind of growing into my teenage years thinking, I wonder when I'll actually get to go to the adult table. And then somewhere in my mid-20s, I got to go to the adult table, and I thought, I'd really like to go back to the kids' table, right? Like all of a sudden you want to just kind of revert back. You're like, this is a little too intense. I don't know that I want to talk about all these things, but I wanted to go back to the kids' table. But these things naturally happen. But I believe, and I hope you're coming to believe, that the table is a place where walls can come down, where people can feel seen and known in a unique way. The story that we find ourselves in today, it comes from Luke chapter 19, and it's a story about the oldest city, one of the oldest cities in recorded history. And like most ancient cities, it had walls to protect people. And this city was especially famous for its walls, because you probably if you grew up in church at all, you remember that there was a song about this city. It's a city called Jericho, right? And the people of God marched around Jericho, and the walls came Tumbling down. Yes. You guys all went to VBS as kids. Good job. That's fantastic. The walls came tumbling down. So Jericho was famous for this city where God's people, it was one of the first cities that God's people took as they came into the promised land, and they did it without a military conflict. They just marched around the city, and then the walls came tumbling down. It's an incredible story. God did amazing work. And so this wall, this city that had walls that had been broken down, over time built those walls back up because they wanted to keep the city safe. Now, what's interesting is as we read this story, what we find is that God's people had inhabited that city, and they had not only rebuilt walls around the city, but they had built lots of other walls. They had built walls around who was in and who was out, who was seen and who was unseen, who could come to the table and who couldn't. And so it wasn't just the physical walls that existed in this city. There were lots and lots of walls. Here's how the story goes. It starts this way. It says, he, that's Jesus, entered Jericho and was passing through it. And a man was there whose name was Zacchaeus. And Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector, and he was very rich. So I want you to get this picture. Jesus has been in and around Jericho. He's been having a couple of different conversations with different people. The one right before this, he has with a blind beggar just outside. And just before that, he has a conversation with a rich young ruler. And now, Jesus is coming into the city of Jericho. It's like Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade, right? People have gone and staked their spot at the edge of the curb to watch Jesus and his friends come through town. I mean, there were probably not as many balloons. Bluey wasn't there, so it wasn't as, wasn't quite the same magnitude of parade. But Jesus and his friends were coming through town, and so people had gotten there early. They'd set out their lawn chairs. They had the one friend who was willing to stay there and wait to reserve everybody else's seat so that nobody got in front of them. They got the best view. They were right there, and they weren't going to let anybody get in front of them because they were at the front. So Jesus was coming through town, and people were really excited. And it says that there was a man named Zacchaeus. Zacchaeus, what's interesting about Zacchaeus' name is it's the Greek version of a Hebrew name that means pure or clean. And then in the next few words, we get told something completely different. That Zacchaeus is the chief tax collector. Now, tax collectors in this day weren't just like, it's not like the guy who works for the IRS that you know. Tax collectors were hated in this culture because they worked with Rome, who was an occupying empire in Israel. And they collected taxes from their people, from their brothers and sisters, from their friends, from their relatives, from the people that they worshiped with. They collected taxes for Rome, for this occupying empire. And not only that, they also added a little bit so that they could make money. Now, Zacchaeus wasn't just a regular tax collector. Zacchaeus was the chief tax collector, which means if this is a pyramid scheme, Zacchaeus is at the very top, right? Like he's taking advantage of everyone. Nobody likes this guy. There are walls and walls and walls between him and everyone else. But what's interesting, verse 3 tells us this, that Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was. Zacchaeus was trying to see who Jesus was. He wants to see Jesus. He wants to go and see the parade, but not just see the parade. He wants to see who Jesus is. Like he wants to really kind of figure out, he's heard about this Jesus guy. He's heard about all these things that he's done. Maybe he heard the story about the rich young ruler. Maybe they were friends. I don't know. But he's heard about Jesus, and so he wants to see who Jesus is. And here's what I believe about the world, is that every person we come into contact with, whether they know it or not, is trying to see who Jesus is. They're trying to find out who Jesus is. If Jesus is who he says he is, or if Jesus is something else, and sometimes it doesn't always look like curiosity or desire. Sometimes it looks like a lot of words that sound like pushing. Just to see who Jesus is. And oftentimes, when people look to the church to see who Jesus is, do you know what they see? They see a wall. They see a wall. Because they feel like maybe they can't get to this version of Jesus. Maybe they can't get to see who Jesus is because there's some people in the way. There's some people who have told them some things. There are people who maybe made them feel in some way like they weren't welcome, like they weren't allowed to come to the table. And inadvertently, so often, we have built walls that don't allow people to see who Jesus is. Maybe it's this gap of understanding. Maybe it's just a sense that they're not able to come to the adult table. But there was something for Zacchaeus, and I think there's something for every person that longs to see who Jesus is. The Greek literally implies he was seeking him. What Zacchaeus doesn't realize is that Jesus was also seeking him. When we get to the end of the story, we'll see exactly what Jesus was looking for. But I hope we become people who live in such a way that it makes people want to see who Jesus is. That it tears down walls. But the scripture goes on and it kind of shares this idea. It says, he was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not. On account of the crowd, he could not. All of the people had come out. All of the people had set up their seats. All of the people had figured out that, like, hey, Zacchaeus isn't here early. We finally got one on him. You know, I know he's been taking money from us. I know he's not been a good guy. I know that, like, he's really rich. And, like, we finally have one up on Zacchaeus. And so the people don't allow him to see who Jesus is. They don't allow him to come to the front. They don't allow him to sit at the big table. He's relegated way over there. They've built all of these physical walls. Again, in so many ways, we often do this without even realizing that we're doing it. And we're going to do everything that they could to keep him in the place that they felt like he deserved to be, the back of the line. And oftentimes, people in our lives get used to a certain version of us. And the people there along the line, they got used to a certain version of Zacchaeus, and they didn't realize that Zacchaeus wanted to see who Jesus was. He wanted to see if all the stories were true. He wanted to see if this guy really could change his life, just like he had changed so many other people's lives. But they were so used to the version of Zacchaeus that took advantage of people that they didn't want to let him get close. And sometimes people can't see the work that we're doing in our own lives. The work that God's doing in us. The changes that we've made or want to make. And they'll put up some walls to keep us from seeing what we want them to see. Again, sometimes people of faith especially will close ranks and circle the wagons. And not allow people who want to see Jesus to truly see Jesus. Well, the scriptures tell us something else. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short. He was short in stature. He's short. You guys, ever since we started this story, some of you have been singing this song in your head. Zacchaeus was was he, right? Yeah, he climbed up in a sycamore tree for the Lord he wanted to see. We all were kind of singing that song. If you grew up in church, you kind of know that one and you remember that one. Zacchaeus was short in stature. He couldn't see. Couldn't see over all of the crowd. He couldn't see over all of these walls that were built by people. But the Greek isn't exactly explicit about him being short. It could be rendered in that way, it could be translated in that way, but it could also mean that he was young. And maybe they just decided that he's too young to come to the adult table. He's too young to be involved in this. We get a rich young ruler followed by a chief tax collector who's short or young or both. But I think what's so amazing to me about Zacchaeus is that even though he encounters this wall of humanity, he's persistent. He doesn't just give up and go home. He doesn't say, I had a bad church experience, I'm out. I'm done, I'm not going back. He really wanted to see what this Jesus thing was all about. He really wanted to see Jesus. So he runs ahead and he climbs a tree. He ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass by that way. For an adult male in this culture to be climbing a tree was very unbecoming of him. Somebody of his stature, somebody of his importance in the community would not have climbed a tree. It's just not something adults do all the time. A couple of months ago, we had my youngest son's 12-year-old birthday party, right? And so we invited a bunch of kids over to our house. We had some church friends and we had some school friends, and we were so excited about our church friends and our school friends being in the same place. And we were talking to Micah about, hey, what do you want to do at your birthday party? What things do you want to have? We could do this and we could do this and we could do this, all of these things. And he was like, I just want to play in the yard and climb the tree. And I had to explain to him that, look, you're becoming a preteen, your friends are 12 and 13-year-old boys, they're going to want to play video games and do all this stuff. We got to have some cool stuff so that they think you're cool. I'm building these walls for my son. And I don't want them to think of him in a certain way, and so I'm trying to talk him into something else. He's like, no, we just want to play in the yard and climb the tree. And I was like, that's not going to work. And so we got some yard games, we got cornhole and ladder ball, and we had some soccer goals out, and everybody played and had a good time. All these, teenage boys who are super cool, we're just having a great time. And at one point, I go in the house to get something, and I come back out, and doggone it, if there are not 10, 12, and 13-year-old boys up in our magnolia tree, they're all up there. And I'm just I don't know. I don't know anymore. He was persistent in what he wanted and what he wanted to experience with his friends. And if you're seeking Jesus, if you're wanting to see who Jesus is, I want to encourage you to be persistent. And more importantly, don't walk away from Jesus because of people. Don't walk away from Jesus because of people. Because people will put up walls and people accidentally say things that make you feel like you can't be. As I talk to people who tell me about their church experiences, they always end up talking about a bad church experience that they had with a someone, not with Jesus. So don't walk away from Jesus because of people. People are people. And they don't always see the best in you or for you. The walls that people put up are more a reflection of their own spiritual and emotional health than they are of yours. So if you're trying to see Jesus, don't quit because of people. Very well-meaning people sometimes put up walls without meaning it. Zacchaeus climbs up in this tree. Verse 5 says this: when Jesus came to that place, to that one place where Zacchaeus is up in this tree, Jesus is coming through town, he stops and he looked up and he said to Zacchaeus, "Hurry and come down." Hurry and come down. When Jesus came to that place, he looked up and saw Zacchaeus and told him, come on down. And I'm sure Zacchaeus was a little concerned at this. Like, I imagine there's a little bit of a pause in between what Jesus says, come down, and what he says next. And I imagine it was just long enough for Zacchaeus to be like, oh man, I'm in trouble now. Like, this guy who does all these miracles, he's just called me down, and he's about to call me to the carpet, and he's about to tell me all the things I did wrong, and he's about to tell me, why I can't connect with him, and he's about to tell me all the reasons why I'm bad, and he's about to tell me all of the things that I've done. He's about to read me the act. And I think all of the people in the crowd are like thinking the same thing. They're like, yes! Jesus is going to tell Zacchaeus what's wrong with him. This is going to be great. We're all going to be here to get to see it. I'm sure Zacchaeus is running through all of these thoughts because he had built all sorts of walls. I'm sure he had a list of these self-limiting beliefs that were a mile long. I'm sure he thought, again, I'm too short, I'm too small, I'm no good, I'm not good enough, people don't like me, I could never get close to Jesus. All of these things that he thought about himself, all of these walls that he had built up in response to the walls that others had built up around him. And often we live our own lives out of our self-limiting beliefs, assuming what somebody's response to us will be before we've even given them a chance to respond to us. We assume so much on God and Jesus about how they'll respond to us based on what we think about ourselves. We reinforce our own walls with our self-limiting beliefs, walls that keep us in the place that we are, as opposed to the place that we could be. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up. Jesus saw Zacchaeus in the tree. And when I say Jesus saw him, I don't mean like he just noticed him. Jesus saw him. Maybe for the first time in Zacchaeus' life, somebody actually saw him. Like, we all long to be seen. The Greek word that's used there for looked up is this word anablepo, which is most often used in the scriptures to describe the recovery of sight or to see something again. He doesn't just see Zacchaeus, he sees Zacchaeus again for the first time. Like, he really sees who Zacchaeus is, and not just who Zacchaeus is, but who Zacchaeus could be. Because I think seeing people really frees people to be the people that they could be. And I think that's what Jesus sees in Zacchaeus. He sees the Zacchaeus that he could be. And when Jesus looks at me, he sees the me that I could be. When Jesus looks at you, he sees the you that you could be. And I imagine when Jesus invites him to come down out of the tree, Zacchaeus probably pauses for a moment. Because there's this distance between him and Jesus then, and there's this distance that so many of us lean into. It feels safe up in the tree because of the distance. We don't all necessarily want to be seen, because if we're seen, we might have to make some changes. Behind those walls that we've built up, it feels safe. It feels safe being unknown. It feels safe with this image that we've built up all these years. But you and I both know that there is more to life beyond the wall. And life to the fullest takes place when we come down out of the tree, when we allow some of those walls to fall down. We allow Jesus to see all of us. Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today. Jesus doesn't read him the riot act, he invites himself over for dinner. right? And we talk to our kids all the time. We're like, hey, you can't invite yourself to other people's houses. Like, that's not okay. But Jesus does it. Jesus does it. He says, I'm coming over to your house. I want to sit at your table. I want to spend time with you. I want you to feel like you are welcomed to the adult table, maybe for the first time in your life, Zacchaeus. I want to share a meal with you. So he hurried down and was happy to welcome him. But all who saw it began to grumble and said, he is gone to be the guest of one who is a sinner. So Zacchaeus hurries down and he's happy. He's full of joy to have Jesus over. But the onlookers who had built all these walls, all of a sudden their walls begin to come down. Their understanding of the way the world works begins to be shaken a little bit, and they respond with grumbling. The guy who had all the walls was overjoyed. The people who had pushed him aside were grumbling about the fact that he got an invitation to eat with Jesus. You would have thought that they would have been excited for him. You would have thought that maybe they would have known the story of Jesus, that when Jesus sits down at a meal with people, it helps to define their lives, and it helps to change the person that they are to the person that they could be. But the people had just assumed that, if we build all these walls around Zacchaeus, he'll eventually get the point. If we just remind him over and over and over again how wrong he is, he'll eventually get the point. And I think we often overestimate our ability to change people and underestimate Jesus' ability to change people. Because it's the presence of Christ that changes Zacchaeus' life. It's not the constant berating of his peers. It's not the disdain from the crowd. It's not the walls that they've built up, but it's a Savior who sought him and seeks each and every one of us, who sat with him and sits with all of us. And that, in the end, is what will change all of our lives. Look, here's the deal. If we haven't had any uptight religious people grumble about what we're doing lately, then we're probably not doing the work of Jesus. Zacchaeus comes and has a meal with Jesus, and he's moved by his conversation around the table. Zacchaeus stands up at the table and he says, Lord, look, half of my possessions I will give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I will pay back 4 times as much. And then Jesus said to him, today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save that which is lost. Zacchaeus is so moved at the table that all of these walls that he had built, all of these walls that others had imposed on him, come tumbling down. Because he felt seen by Jesus. And I don't know what the conversation was that they had around the table. I don't know how that went. I don't know, in my mind, I like to think that Jesus sat with him and was like, hey, Zacchaeus, you remember when you climbed the tree? That was funny, right? Because you're small, you couldn't see over everybody, so you climbed up in the tree. But he said, you don't have to climb a tree to see me. You can come down and be with me. And I think Jesus said, because I see so much in you, I'll climb onto a tree of the cross for you. And Zacchaeus gives up what was so defining to his identity. This wall of wealth that he had built over all these years. He was rich, but now he's found what was lost in his life, a sense of being seen and connected and cared for, was now found. So maybe one of the questions we need to ask ourselves is, what has been lost around your table? What feels lost around your table? Maybe it's a disconnect from someone else. Maybe there's somebody that feels unseen. Maybe you feel unseen at the table. Maybe you feel like you're perpetually at the kids' table, never noticed. And you feel lost. I think the table helps me to see beyond me and to see the me that I could be. And so I can't let the walls and broken relationships and feeling unseen keep me from being the person that God wants me to be. Because each of us are seen by Jesus. And so maybe at the table, wherever that is for you, you can take the extra time to see someone. To not presume upon them, but just to see them. Because you know that you've been seen by a Savior who wants to see you. And maybe the lost thing that Jesus is seeking right now in your family is just revitalized relationships, connectedness, a sense of who you are in your family. And you might not need to give away all of your possessions or 4 times whatever to whatever, but what you might need to give is a little bit of grace and to see somebody who hasn't felt seen in a long time. To really see them. Because changed lives change lives. And where people feel seen, walls come down. And so many of us have self-limiting beliefs in this area. I can't forgive, I can't get past, they won't understand, they won't see me, they won't hear me. Jesus already has. Wherever you're at, whatever you've been wrestling with, whatever walls you've built up, whatever tree you've climbed, Jesus sees you. But more than that, Jesus sees the me that I could be. And he sees it in you. He sees the you that you could be.